When I was just 11, I had guinea pigs and a gerbil, a rabbit and 2 turtles, a mouse and a Siamese cat, and one chummy little hamster, a sunny little guy named Honey Bear. When I woke up one sunny Sunday morning and brought my pal a piece of lettuce leaf, my honey bear lay still and wasn't breathing, and I gasped and stared at him in disbelief. Well, I ran upstairs and I asked my dad to help me. Most dads would tell me Honey Bear was dead, but my dad placed his loving arms around me, and he dried my tears, and this is what he said: "The love of God is always with you, darling. The word was given and will never end. In God's eyes, Honey Bear is living, and death is nothing love could ever send." And we shared the telling of the Easter story, about when the angel rolled away the stone. I knew Honey Bear was in the hand of Jesus, and with him he could never be alone. Still doubting, I dug his grave in silence to place his rigid coldness deep inside. But bore I placed his Kleenex coffin in it, I opened up the lid, dissatisfied. And Honey Bear uncurled like he'd been sleeping. His knowing eyes looked brightly into mine, as if to say, "I'd love to tell you my story, but first a lettuce leaf would be divine." And we shared the wonder of that Easter morning, such living love so powerfully shown. I knew Honey Bear was in the hand of Jesus, and with him he could never be alone. Yes, Honey Bear was in the hand of Jesus. The two of them had rolled away the stone. When I was just 11, I had guinea pigs and a gerbil, a rabbit and 2 turtles, a mouse and a Siamese cat, and one chummy little hamster, a sunny little guy named Honey Bear. Honey Bear. As an adult, I've often wondered what happened that Sunday morning, that Easter morning. Because after discovering my dead hamster and praying all morning with my dad, then digging that hole and thinking to open the little box before placing it in it, and there he was. He uncurled and looked up at me alive. Well, I think the answer is that even though my young eyes and senses were trying to tell me that Honey Bear was dead, this disagreed with what I knew about God as love. And my childlike spiritual senses had me stick with God. That's what I think. Despite any sadness that I felt. As a child, it was natural for me to turn to God when I was in trouble, so I guess it felt natural when Honey Bear was healed. So natural that I actually forgot about this healing for many years until I was reminiscing with my dad one time, many years later, and then I finally turned it into a song just in 2010. Well, here's a little bit of my background. I've been a Christian and a student of Christian Science my whole life. And I've been blessed with many proofs of God's care and protection. I'm also married to a wonderful man, a well-loved family doctor who's been my husband for 35 years. And we've raised 2 children, and I have one beautiful 1-year-old granddaughter. As a spiritual healer, a practitioner of Christian Science, I am available to help people meet life's challenges through praying with them. I like to think of myself as an advocate for wholeness and harmony based on the foundational principle, God is love, and the tender relationship of God and man made in the image and likeness of God, love. Have I got everything figured out? No. I wish that the resurrection of hamsters and people was an everyday occurrence. But I know it's possible. And this keeps me relying and trying to lean on God more every day. I know the raising of Honey Bear seems remarkable and perhaps even hard to accept, but it did happen. And today, this afternoon, I want to share more examples of how the shared divine principles are transforming and healing the world, and why anyone can be a healer. In recent history, there's been an explosion of scientific discoveries both in mathematics and physics. One example is the discovery of the principle of aerodynamics that has allowed us to be able to understand flight and build airplanes that can actually fly. Just think of it. Prior to our sufficient understanding of this principle, we knew flying happened, but we didn't know how to accomplish it with predictable results. Now take a moment and imagine with me what our shared 64 divine principles might do if we understand them sufficiently and put them into practice collectively. Well, ultimately, we should be able to build this peaceful, healthy, just, and compassionate world that we've always wanted to live in. We have the tools, but of course, there's a lot of work ahead before this is finally accomplished. And do we believe it's even possible? Well, let's dig a little deeper into the principles today, and then I'll let you decide. First, let's take a look at the dictionary's definition of the word principle. A fundamental truth, law, doctrine, or motivating force upon which others are based. A rule of conduct, especially right conduct. the ultimate source, origin, or cause of something. A primary source, the divine principle, God. I think it's really interesting that Merriam-Webster uses the term divine principle, because I'm familiar with this term and base my healing work on the idea of God as principle or love. Mary Baker Eddy, in her book Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, first published in 1875, introduced the idea of God as the creative, living principle, in parallel to the ideas of God as absolute life, truth, love, and spirit. In the 1800s and the 1900s, the idea of God as principle was a new and very radical idea. But today, human beings are learning that principles literally make the world go round. So what is it that makes divine principles so timeless and practical? Well, anyone can practice these principles. They're not dependent on culture, skin color, tradition, food choices, one's religion, where one lives, or even when one lives. We will be seeing today that everything that manifests and expands the good in the world is founded on divine principle. I would like to share an example of the principle, seek the good of the world, in action. I found this account in a wonderful book by two brothers, Dan and Chip Heath, called Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard. It's also in the bibliography. In 1990, the charity Save the Children was given only 6 months to make a difference in overcoming malnutrition in children in Vietnam. They were aware that the problem was complex and widespread and included poverty, sanitation, and lack of education. But the team at Save the Children did not become mesmerized by the largeness or the complexity of this problem, or even try to fix it. Instead, they changed focus and started looking for any nourished children to see what their mothers were doing in their kitchens. Well, these mothers were adding tiny shrimp and sweet potato greens to the children's rice, which was not a common practice. But shrimp were plentiful in the rice paddies, and the greens could be salvaged from their gardens. So, 50 malnourished families in that village were invited to bring these ingredients to a potluck to cook alongside the nourished families. Within 6 months, 65% of the children were now nourished. And when this program was extended countrywide, 2.2 million people in 265 villages had helped themselves solve the problem of malnutrition in their children. You see, looking for what is already working can help build solutions from within the good that is already present. This particular principle underlies all human progress. Try testing this one out yourself, at home, at work, anywhere where you're looking for a creative solution that won't include the problem in it. And remember that building on the good that's already present helps us see the power of God at work in the world. We practice the principles, and the principles bring the presence of a loving God practically into our lives. In the preface of Science and Health, I love that Eddie reassures us. She says, the divine principle of healing is proved in the personal experience of any sincere seeker of truth. Beautiful. Well, now, I would like to share a more recent personal healing experience based primarily on these two foundational principles. God is love, and man is made in the image and likeness of God. Love, which we have already seen are two principles shared by all the world's major religions. This healing helps illustrate the relationship of these two principles to a natural state of health. A number of years ago, I took a walk in the mountain vineyard near my home. As I was climbing the hill, suddenly a sharp pain shot through my knee. I couldn't walk, and I managed, though, to hobble up to the top of the hill and sit down on a bench that happened to be at the top of the vineyard. I admit, I felt very afraid. My mind desperately wanted to look for a physical cause of the pain, to diagnose it, understand it, and then fix it. But I resisted this temptation. You see, through my study of Christian Science, I've learned that fear is a factor in the experience of all disease and suffering. And I've also discovered in my scriptures, the Holy Bible, that it states, there is no fear in love, and perfect love casts out fear. So, I turned my thought away from the pain in my body and affirmed God's ever-presence and his unconditional love for me. I remembered that I was well made in the image and likeness of Spirit, God, and could never be outside of this relationship. I remember praying as if my life depended on it, and while my freedom and movement in the upcoming summer certainly did depend on it. And I also remember affirming that divine love was acting as law and was the only law in operation right then, right there, in my consciousness. Everything else was not important. And I never let a single doubt about the power of God to enter my thinking. And this truth destroyed the belief that pain and fear could be more powerful than God. And in that moment, the pain simply vanished. And I walked down that mountain, rejoicing and praising the law of love in my life. Yeah, and this healing happened about 4 years ago in May. Okay, but can these principles actually help to transform a nation? Let's see. Well, in 1989, something happened that no one thought was possible. A concrete wall built in 1961 separated East and West Germany. It separated families and divided a nation for 28 years. And poverty and oppression were on the eastern side of the wall. In East Germany, weekly prayer meetings were being quietly held in parish churches. And over the course of 8 years, the number of people who attended and were committed to the idea of peaceful resistance grew. On the evening of October the 9th, 1989, thousands of people poured out of churches into the streets with tens of thousands of candles in their hands and prayers for peace in their hearts. There were an estimated 70,000 men, women, and children walking through the streets throughout East Germany that night, and the spirit of nonviolence continued with them. My dear friend and teacher, Virginia Harris, was in East Berlin that night in 1989 and attended the march. She observed the lack of violence and recognized that you can't hold a club or pick up a rock when you have two hands around a candle and you're guarding its flame. 1 month later, the government fell, and the infamous Berlin Wall was soon torn down. One military guard reported that night they were prepared for anything, but not candles and prayers. Now, I thought to count up how many of the known shared principles that are on your sheet were present and active in this reuniting of Germany. Well, they include conquer with love, love your enemies, moderation in all things, blessed are the peacemakers, persistence is the key to success. At least 43 of the 64 principles were present and active. Is it any wonder that the oppression, including the wall, could not continue to stand in the presence of this divine power? Well, I've come to see that the unifying of Germany was substantially the practical results of 70,000 individuals courageously, patiently, consistently, consciously or unconsciously, practicing the teachings or principles that are spiritual foundations in every world religion. And here's some fascinating related research relating to the spread of ideas. And it was published in July 2011 by scientists at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. They discovered that there is a 10% tipping point. When just 10% of a population holds an unshakable belief, then the belief will be adopted by the majority of the society. And once that number grows above 10%, the idea spreads like flame. For the principles, I think this means that on average, it should take only 10% of the world's faithful consistently putting into practice these spiritual principles to have a major healing impact, a change of thought and action, just like happened in the fall of the wall. Ah, yes. Here are 5 warnings among the 64. Judge not. Pride goes before a fall. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Be slow to anger, and he who slays anyone, which in other words is, all they that take the sword will perish with the sword. When these warnings are unheeded, ideological terrorism and violent extremism appear to grow, as we've seen more recently. These can undermine faith in the power of God to heal and to save. They compromise human dignity and try to defile the good in religion. But thank goodness, they can never touch or destroy the saving principles. God is love, and truth is universal. And the good news is that historically, whenever faith in the power of God to heal and to save is renewed, strengthened, and tried, leaning on God becomes natural again, and progress and a period of prosperity inevitably follow. I've often asked myself, can one person actually make a difference? Well, I'm sure we can all think of people that have made a difference. But I think of Nelson Mandela, for example, one man who made an incredible difference in his country and inspired the world. In his biography, Walk to Freedom, he recounts a critical moment of choice as he was freed from prison. As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. You see, Nelson chose to be a peacemaker. Practicing the principles is not always easy. There are many traps along the way, both inside and outside. For example, selfishness, fear, lack of faith, ignorance, resistance, persecution, hatred. These can try to throw us off a principled path, and we have to watch out for these, or they undermine the good that we can see and do. And we end up having to learn our principle lessons all over again. Of all the principles that we have looked at today, I believe that seek the good of the world is the most radical and exciting to practice, to work with. It has the potential to bring about a quantum shift in how we constructively think about the world. It offers a radical approach to problem solving and can make a significant contribution in finding creative solutions to the complex problems in the world, as we have seen in the example of Save the Children, helping grow one nourished village into 265. And I've put the others up on the screen as well, but they speak for themselves. I've certainly started asking myself more recently, what good am I seeing today that might be part of a solution to a challenge at home, at work, at church, in the community, and in the world? Everyone that's recognizing and then building upon the good in the world is healing and revealing even more good. So, is there a bottom line here? What is the evidence suggesting? Well, it suggests that practicing the principles transforms us into healers. Today, we've seen how they help us find and build real solutions that don't include the problem in it, establish better health in mind and body, destroy ideological terrorism and oppression, promote justice, unity, and peace, and prove the power of God to be a living, healing principle found within our faith traditions. And it's hard to ignore these numbers. The more 64 principles in action, the more healing they affect. 46 were present in the solution to malnutrition in Vietnam. 44 were present in the fall of the Berlin Wall. The numbers seem to speak for themselves, proving that the more principles in action, the more exponential is the healing effect. Understanding and consistently practicing the divine principles is ultimately the only way that ignorance, hate, fear, injustice, and disease, and war can ultimately be completely exposed and ultimately truly let go or destroyed, leaving only the good in the world. I love how Mary Baker Eddy describes this. Let unselfishness, goodness, mercy, justice, health, holiness, love, the kingdom of heaven reign within us, and sin, disease, and death will diminish. And so, we would like to close by thanking you for practicing your faith, for mining all the good that it contains and helps you to accomplish. I pray that we go out today confident in knowing that we are indeed healers together, because we understand that valuing and practicing our shared religious principles can ultimately heal the world. Thank you.